the Kia Cerato GT isn't just all show and no go. No. Instead, it's a front-wheel drive menace. My name's Nish, and you're watching The Word on Cars. Let's talk Cerato GT. So, the GT. It's the performance variant of the Cerato lineup, and it's been around since 2018 as a sedan, C Exhibit A, and a hatch. Now, what you're looking at here is the facelifted model, which actually gets some decent equipment and comes in a few different colors. This one's runway red. The facelifted Cerato dropped in 2021 for the 2022 model year with updated Kia badges, an updated face, an updated bum, as well as minor changes on the inside, which I'll get to later. Price-wise, you can get into a base S model for a touch under 29,000 Australian dollars, or for 10 grand more, you can get yourself into a top-spec GT, which gets you all the bells and whistles. And if you're not one to shy away from the second-hand market, you can pick up this Cerato GT from Blinker in Melbourne for under 35 grand with low kilometers, 5 years of remaining factory warranty, and another 3 years of warranty just for letting Blinker know that you saw this Cerato GT on The Word on Cars. You're welcome. Now, looks-wise, the Cerato and GT, guys, looks pretty darn good. The front end's been sharpened with slimmed down headlamps that sweep into the sides with unique daytime running lights. You have these aluminium trim pieces on either side that follow the shape of the headlamps and wrap around the proprietary Kia Tiger nose grille. And there's a sporty front bumper bar with air intakes on either side, red accents, and a GT badge for good measure. Over on the side of the Cerato GT though, things have pretty much stayed the same. Same 18-inch wheels on all four corners, same gloss black mirrors that are heated that only the GT got, same side skirts with gloss black inserts, and same doors. The back end though, like the front, also got updated. There's the same rear spoiler but with redesigned tail lamps with daytime running lights that have the same lighting signature as the front, along with the same non-functional light bar that's been carried over from the pre-facelift model. By the way, you can buy a kit to make this a functional light bar for those of you out there, like me, that can't help themselves. The bumper bar is also different, still sporty though, with a different lower housing for the reverse and fog lamps, and a restyled diffuser-ish lower apron that has cutouts for the restyled exhaust tips. Properly functional, by the way. And speaking of the exhaust, now, for those that want even more noise than that, there's plenty of choice in the aftermarket. And on that point, the Cerato GT is quite modifiable. The 1.6 turbo four-cylinder in this thing cranks out 150 kilowatts and 265 newton meters, which is decent. But add a performance chip and you'll easily crank out over 30 kilowatts and close to 100 newton meters more. And considering the GT has a tare weight of 1,370 kilograms, that's a good recipe for fun. The GT also gets sports suspension that drops the ride height by 5 millimeters, bigger front and rear brakes, and multi-link suspension in the back compared to its siblings. I'll tell you how well they work when we get this thing on the road. Getting into the Cerato GT is standard fanfare. Press a button on the handle to unlock and lock the doors, and as expected, you can also use the key fob, which I think looks snazzy. It's the same one Kia throws in with the Kia Stinger that looks like a remote detonator to blow off the doors. And for a small car, there's enough space to get in through the front doors and rear doors. The interior in the Cerato GT is surprisingly sporty, with a flat-bottom steering wheel with perforated leather grips and red stitching, aluminium pedals, and for seating, you get electrically adjustable sports seats with memory presets, leather inserts with embossed GT logos, and the same red stitching as the steering wheel. With these seats, and even though the Cerato is on the smaller side, there's still enough headroom, legroom, and enough clearance for knees, although the taller might struggle for space in here. The GT also gets a sunroof, no panoramic roof unfortunately, with a manually operated sunshade which brings a little more light into the cabin. Materials wise in here, being a sub 40 grand sedan, Kia still manages to squeeze in soft touch surfaces on the top of the dashboard, tops of the doors and center armrest, along with what looks like brushed aluminium trimmings, looks quite nice, and gloss black trim that wraps around the center console. Although the rest of the interior is plastic, everything feels nice and solid. Kia also throws a 10.25-inch touchscreen into the GT, which is an upgrade from the 8-inch screen in the pre-facelifted model, with the same interface you find in most Kia and Hyundai products these days, which works fine, it's responsive, gets volume and media knobs, a row of quick access buttons, comes with the usual functions we've come to expect, and you get an 8-speaker JBL stereo complete with a subwoofer, or subby as we Aussies like to call it, in the back, which sounds pretty decent actually. What's interesting is that the GT gets wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, while the base model is the only one in the lineup with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Go figure. The GT also gets a 4.2-inch helper screen that sits between the analog dials, which I personally prefer in a sports car. You'll find trip and driver assistance information in the helper screen, which you can navigate through the steering wheel controls. On driver assistance systems, the GT gets everything you could ask for. There's adaptive cruise control, which will speed up or slow down based on what the vehicle in front of you is doing, driver attention detection to make sure you're paying attention, autonomous emergency braking, which will even detect pedestrians and cyclists and hit the brakes, and emergency stop signal to warn those behind you that you're coming to a stop quickly by flashing the hazard lights. Active lane keeping to keep you centered in the lane, active blind spot monitoring to pull you back in if there's a vehicle in the next lane, which includes safe exit warning to stop you from opening the door and stepping into oncoming vehicles. Active rear cross traffic alert, which will brake when it needs to if you don't. A rear occupant alert in case you forgot you had your kids in the back. Stability control with traction control to keep you in control. And a rear view camera with dynamic grid lines and parking sensors all around in reverse or at low speeds. The GT has your safety needs covered. And speaking of reverse, the GT is the only model in the lineup with a 7-speed DCT or dual clutch transmission for fast shifts. And it works like a conventional gear lever, which you can slide over to kick the gearbox into manual mode, so you can rotate through gears yourself using the gear lever or the paddles on the steering wheel. In terms of drive modes, the GT gets normal, eco, sport and smart modes. Smart will choose the right drive mode based on how you're driving on its own. The Cerato GT also gets dual zone climate control with physical dials and buttons, as well as a dedicated screen to get comfortable. What's even more impressive is that Kia squeezes in not just heated seats, but ventilated seats as well. It's hard not to be impressed by the amount of equipment you get in the GT. Kia has also used the interior space really well to include enough storage in here. Starting on the dash, there's a good sized glove box which is lit. On the center console, there's a wireless charger for phones, under which you'll find a little more storage along with a 12-volt power outlet and 2 USB-C ports. 2 cup holders with storage behind the parking brake toggle and auto hold button, more storage under the center armrest, and door bins with bottle holders. Sporty and practical. The back of the Cerato GT, on the other hand, is bare bones. Aside from aluminium door handles with piano black surrounds and the sports seats in the back, which are comfortable and definitely look sporty, everything is plastic back here. There's vents for the backseat passengers, along with a USB-C port, a map pocket on the passenger seat, they skimped out on the driver's seat, bins in the doors, again with bottle holders like the front, and an armrest with cup holders. In terms of space, it's not too bad back here given the size of the Cerato. At 5 feet 9 inches, I still have a little more headroom to play with, my knees clear the front seats with extra space, and my feet slip under the driver's seat nicely. The middle seat is useless unless you want to get real nice and cozy, and there is a hump on the floor. It's low and wide enough though not to be too obtrusive. In terms of boot space, the Cerato gets 502 litres of capacity in sedan form compared to 428 litres in the hatch, with a little more storage under the floor around the spare wheel to pack away smaller items. And other than a couple of latches back here to drop the 60-40 split rear seats for anyone that needs more cargo space, Kia doesn't advertise exactly how much more space you get. There isn't much else back here. So, I've told you everything you get in the Cerato GT, but how does it drive? Let's find out. So, driving the Cerato GT. Now, when Blinker called me and said they had a Cerato GT and asked me whether I wanted to have a look at this car, I thought, sure. Now, I made a bit of an assumption though. I assumed that the Cerato GT was cosmetically sporty. And boy, was I wrong, because this thing, it's properly a little menace. It's only got 150 kilowatts under the hood, but it does have 265 Newton meters, which makes this thing quite torquey. It pulls, it moves, and I wouldn't say it's fast. I'd describe it as being quick and zippy. And I mean, drop a couple of gears down and put your foot into it, and it just pulls. And under load, the exhaust actually sounds quite nice. Even though when you're idling and you rev this thing up, it sounds a little muted. Under load, it sounds pretty darn good. Now, 0 to 100 time of the GT is only 7.2 seconds, but it definitely feels quicker than that. And with a fuel consumption of 6.9 litres per 100 kilometres, that's a claimed number from Kia, it's not too bad. I mean, the engine delivers plenty of performance. It is, as I said, properly quick. Kia's really done a great job of just pulling this car together. I mean, for a sub $40,000 sedan, that's pretty unbelievable. Then we have the 7-speed DCT in the Cerato GT. Now, that operates very much like a DCT. When you're driving this thing around in normal mode, in drive, it is a bit more manual-ish. It does rev out a little bit, but gear changes are quite smooth. Stick it into sport though, and the gear changes up and down are just super quick. That never gets old. All in all, the gearbox works really well. I mean, even in drive, you find that it just drops down gear quite quickly. If you leave it in smart mode, it'll do all of this for you automatically. It'll just work out what you're doing and adapt to your driving behavior, which is quite a nice little feature to have. Now, given this thing is so zippy, even though it doesn't have a hell of a lot of power, it is quite quick, like I said. So Kia's given this thing bigger brakes. You have 305mm discs up front that are vented, which is unique to the GT, and 284mm solid discs on the back, which it shares with the Sport Plus model. And they work really well. I mean, it comes to a grinding halt really, really quickly. They work. Steering wise, I'm actually quite impressed with how well the steering performs in this thing. I mean, it's responsive, it changes directions quite quickly, it's precise, you get a good sense of what the front wheels are doing under you, even though it is front wheel drive. Now, in normal mode, and even if you're in sport mode, to be honest with you, the steering's probably a bit heavier than one would expect. But I personally prefer that. It is a GT car at the end of the day, and it works really well. It works really well for that. There is a little bit of torque steer as well, and given it's front wheel drive, you expect that, but it's not obtrusive, it's not uncontrollable. Just hang on to the steering wheel, put your foot into it, and away you go. Suspension in the GT is oh so good. What's interesting though is people complain that the pre-facelifted models were a little bit too stiff, so Kia hit the books and retuned the suspension and made it a little bit softer. Now, people have still complained that it's now too soft. I would argue that this is perfectly set up for a car that's going to be potentially a daily driver, but also something that you can use on the weekends for some spirited driving. Unless you're tracking this thing or have a welded back, you don't need it any stiffer than this. The suspension works really well, and even though it's front wheel drive, it gives you plenty of confidence to push it through corners. There's very little understeer. The rear rotates through corners thanks to the multi-link suspension, and it grips. It sports Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tyres, so they really help in terms of giving you that level of grip to push this thing around a corner. Jeez, it hangs on. Now, it does lose a little bit of traction between first and second gears, given it is front wheel drive, but once that's done, it does just bog down and move forward. There is a little bit of road noise that comes through from the tyres and a little bit of wind noise, but nothing like a nice exhaust to drown that out. Gee, this thing's a lot of fun. Driver assistance wise, I mentioned that Kia's thrown everything into this thing, and everything works fine. The lane keeping will keep you centered in the lane. It'll navigate through curves on the road, but you do need to be here and present and helping maneuver the car because it's not autonomous like some of the cars that we see these days. It works okay. Now, where it shines though is with the adaptive cruise control, which will bring this thing to a full stop and start moving when the traffic in front of you starts moving. It's not aggressive. You can adjust the aggression through the infotainment system. It picks up cars moving into your lane and it'll slow itself down quite nicely. We've got blind spot monitoring that also works quite well. And as I found out earlier today, the rear cross traffic alert in this thing is super quick. It'll stop you from reversing into someone behind you. So all in all, Kia's squeezes in everything, like I said, from a safety tech perspective. There's really not much else you really need. I must say, I'm properly impressed with this car. Being a sub $40,000 sedan, and being that you can pick up one of these things on the second-hand market for even less. I mean, as I said, this car is for sale at Blinker for around 35 grand. It's pretty good value for money. And if you consider the fact that in this segment, the only other car that competes with this is the Toyota Corolla. And let's face it, you're buying a Corolla if you want to be comfortable or you just want a car that gets you from point A to point B. There isn't anything else like this out there. Some may argue that the Mazda 3 GT would probably be the closest in terms of comparison to this car, but starting price of that is around 43 grand. You don't get any of the safety tech as standard. That's going to cost you an additional $1,500. So if you consider that this thing comes fully loaded for under $40,000 brand new, or as I said, around 35 grand on the second-hand market, it's a pretty damn good deal. So, overall, the Cerato GT isn't just an impressive little sports car. It's an impressive car all around thanks to everything Kia squeezed in. And for the price, whether you're buying new or used, it's a bargain for anyone looking for fun and zippy, or for anyone out there that wants a good platform to get modifying. Either way, the Cerato GT gets my tick of approval. And before I wrap up, I want to thank all of you for tuning in, liking and subscribing. Now, the channel may not have thousands of subscribers, but I appreciate all of you that have subscribed. I can't tell you how excited I get every time we have a new subscriber. So, if you've enjoyed the video and haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing so that we can grow the channel together. And I say together because without you, the Word on Cars wouldn't exist. So, again, thank you to all of you for your support. It means the world to me, and I'll catch you in the next video.